turn off your camera. We do ask, though, because it is so much harder for any presenter to be able to present to a screen of nothing but black squares with white writing across it. If you can keep your camera on, if you're comfortable with your camera on, please do so. It makes the experience so much better for all of our presenters. And as you know, everything we have done these past couple of years has been geared towards all of our members. And as a presenter from somewhere else, we consider him a member for the day. So we want to try to make sure we are giving Michael the best experience he can possibly have by joining us here in Indiana tonight. So if you can keep your cameras on, please do so. This is just night number 2 of a 6-day long spring conference. Tomorrow night, we have a full improv evening with Pat Dwyer, who comes to us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we'll also have an abbreviated version of the masked speaker tomorrow night. So very much looking forward to an evening of entertainment tomorrow as well. But who's ready to hear some enlightenment this evening and some fun this evening? We all ready for this? Fantastic. Michael, are you ready for this tonight? We are ready.
Oh, yes.
Do you want to have a real impact on your audiences, your readers, your prospects? Do you want them to lean into your message, connect with you deeply, and take action to make their lives better? Do you want organizations and meeting planners clamoring to invite you back again and again? Then you must find and deliver emotionally captivating stories. And the fastest, most powerful way to do that is by following the principles Hollywood uses to generate tens of billions of dollars every year through movies and television. During his 40 years as one of Hollywood's top script consultants and story experts, Michael Hauge has developed the principles and methods that have helped entrepreneurs and business leaders increase their revenue by millions of dollars. He has also enlightened, entertained, and transformed more than 500,000 writers, filmmakers, speakers, and business leaders around the world. Michael and I share similar friends. He and I are both friends with Darren LaCroix, former world champion of Toastmasters. And I have lived vicariously through the relationship that Darren has with Michael, listening to the stories that Darren regales us about how transformational Michael has been in his life, and I am sure that he will be in your life. So it is my humblest of honors to introduce to you the one, the only, the magnificent Michael Hauge.
Thank you. No pressure with that introduction. Okay, so once upon a time, that seems like a good place to start. It was 2018, and Al Zenik was sitting in his 23rd floor office looking out over Central Park. And Al Zenik was and is a financial advisor and author working with high net worth individuals and businesses on their finances. And Al was excited because he was on the phone and he was being invited to the annual Gathering of the Titans conference at MIT. Now, the Gathering of the Titans conference is a conference of, well, titans, okay, but I think the industry titans, people who are at the top of their game in various areas. And it was a great honor for him to be invited. And he was, just really beside himself and pleased and so on, getting this invitation, until at the tail end, the conference director who was inviting him said, "Oh, and by the way, our topic this year at the conference is going to be courage. So we'd like you to say something about courage." And so all at once, not so excited, more like anxious, because he's thinking, what do I know about courage? He was an experienced public speaker in the area of, financial advice. So he thought this would be another presentation about, I don't know, T-bills or estate planning or whatever it might be, but not courage. And so he dove in and he worked away trying to figure out, well, what could I say about courage? And what might be a story or two I could tell about courage? And as luck would have it, about 2 weeks before the Gathering of Titans conference was set to be held, he saw me speak. I was at a conference for Indie Books International that publishes my book, Storytelling Made Easy, and I was doing my thing, talking like I will be now. And at the end of my conference, he came up and said, look, can I have your help? In 2 weeks, I've got to give a presentation, a 1-hour presentation talking about courage, and I don't know what I'm going to say. Could you help me? So we dove in and did sort of a crash coaching, getting him ready for this conference. And so he had ideas for some stories. We narrowed them down to 4 stories that he would present. And the first of those stories about courage, he was going to tell the story about when he was a young child, and he and his younger sister had a family crisis. Their mother was having sort of a mental breakdown, and so she was raising them because his father they were divorced, so he had to call his father to come and get him and sort of rescue the kids. And the father decided then he had to take custody to get the kids away from that situation. And he was going to have to raise them as a single parent from then on. And at that time, Al was like 6 and his young sister was only like 2 or 3. And so he was just going to talk about how terrifying that was for Al. And I said, okay, that's a very compelling story, certainly emotional, but you got the wrong hero, because you want the hero, the protagonist or the main character, to be the person that your audience is going to empathize with most, root for most, and really gets across your message. And to me, the person who really showed the most courage in that situation was a father, not only to go get his kids and rescue them in the moment, but to decide that he was now unexpectedly going to be a single parent, a working dad, raising these 2 kids by himself. So Al agreed, and he worked on that story and then went on with the other 3 about, other people he encountered, other things that happened through his life. Okay, so he goes and he gives the presentation to the Gathering of Titans. And what he told me later was that he said, not only did I get a standing ovation, but people came up to me after to just say how moved they were and how much they liked it and so on. So he felt like this was a booming success. So that was good, because he really focused on what his topic was. He told stories that really emotionally involved his audience. But he said there were a couple other unexpected benefits of this. He said, first of all, as people glommed around me, as people do at a conference or after a speaker, and told me how much they enjoyed it and so on, I noticed a separate group of people sort of lining up, wanting to talk to me. And when I went over to them, they were lining up, and each one of them, we're talking about a dozen people at this conference, came up to him and said, look, could you tell me how I can work with you to help me with my finances? And the thing is, at no point in his presentation did Al do anything to pitch his business. I mean, he introduced himself as a financial advisor. One of the stories might have been about one of his clients, but he was not there to get work. He was there because it was an honor. And he told me by the time he had talked to them all, he ended up getting hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue from the people who saw him just because of the 4 stories he told. And I like to share that story because that's a stirring example of what I've come to call stealth marketing. In other words, when you tell stories and where you are trying to persuade people to take action. And by the way, my belief is you should always be telling stories that you're trying to get people to take action, possibly with the exception if it's just supposed to be funny. Well, actually, then you want them to laugh. So always, because whether you're there to get clients or whether you're there to get them to buy a product, or whether you're there to win a competition, or whether you're there just to get invited back to speak, you want them to take action because you want them to persuade them to take the action that's going to help them live better. So even if you're there just to give a message, if it's a contest speech or a speech to say, this is what I have learned in my journey that I think could be helpful, you still want them to leave the story you're telling or the speech you're giving and do whatever action you think will help them live better, that will help them overcome whatever problem they might be dealing with or that you're offering them a solution to. So I like that whole idea of stealth marketing is at one of the cores of what I talk about when I'm talking, to people, either speakers or authors or consultants or internet marketers or whatever. But my favorite part of the story is what Al told me next, and his favorite as well. He said, after they'd all come, people said, great, great, and some of them wanted my card and they wanted to sign up and so on. One woman was sitting off to the sort of standing in the back, not wanting to approach until everybody else was gone. And she said, she finally walked up to him and sort of shyly said, with a tear in her eye or tears in her eyes, she said, I just want to tell you that when you told that story about being a child and being in that terrifying situation, that was the first time I knew anybody had had a situation like I had when I was a child. And she said, I felt like you were just talking to me and just talking about me. And it meant an immense amount to me. And he said that more than the clients, more than the applause, more than feeling good about it, that was his biggest takeaway from this event. And that would be mine too, because what it just emphasizes is one of the main reasons you want to be a speaker is so you will have that experience. The experience you have when you get on a stage and you've been speaking for some time and somebody will come up and my friend Ed Rush is a master speaker and does presentations on speaking and so on. And I've worked with a bunch, but he says, one of the favorite things happened to him is a guy came up and he said, I saw you give a speech like 10 years ago. And he said, really? And he said, what was the speech about? He said, I don't have any idea. I don't remember anything about the speech, but I'll never forget the story you told about being in a jet fighter plane and worried that you were going to crash land on this aircraft carrier. So that's to me one of the reasons we do that. It's one of the reasons that we want to speak, and it's certainly one of the reasons you want to be telling stories. Because here's the thing about stories when it comes to being a speaker. When you step on the stage, or you might be stepping into Zoom like now, as most of us do. I haven't been on a stage in so long, I forget what one looks like because I'm too scared to go out of the door still. Anyway, when you step on or sit down in front of a stage, whoever is in your audience, they're all asking the same 7 questions about you, okay? And I guarantee you have been asking these questions about me since I came on. And even if you'd heard me before a bunch, you'd still be asking them again, wondering, well, what are the answers going to be this time? And here are the 7 questions that they are asking that you want to be sure you get a yes to every one of these 7. The first question is, who are you? Really? Who are you? What are you about? What's your name? What's your personality like? How do you come across as a person? And that isn't a yes or no, and it's just you get my point. They want to know who you are. Second question is, do you get me? By the way, you may have, I don't know, there should be a way to download these, I believe. Were they provided already? I forgot about those details, but I know Nevada sent you some. So if there's a link or you don't need it, you can jot this down. These aren't complicated questions, but if you want to follow along with this and the other list I'll be talking about, you can take notes or type on it or whatever. Okay, so Question number 2, do you get me? In other words, do you have any idea what I'm about, what my life is like, what I want, what I long for, what problems I'm facing? Do you understand what I'm about? Okay. Third question, are you an expert? Okay. Because whenever somebody sits down in front of you, unless you're in a school play and it's your parents sort of have to be there, but by and large, you got to figure, if you know, in the Toastmaster arena, if you're up on stage, people are coming to see you because they hope you will solve a problem they have. Now, they may be there because they're attending, say, you know, the district speech contest. And so they may be thinking, well, who's the better speaker, or just, you know, they're watching. But if you are offering with your speech, in whatever the context, a solution that would help them solve a problem and make their life better or easier, that's a speech that they're gonna appreciate much more. So they want to know, are you an expert at what you're doing, and do you know how to solve my particular problem? I mean, you might be an expert at the accordion, but unless it's an audience full of accordion players or wannabes, maybe they're not seeing you as the expert they need to solve their particular problem. I think I combined 3 and 4 there. Okay, so are you an expert? Meaning, do you know what you're talking about, whatever it is, but also, do you know how to solve the problem I came with that I'd like the solution to? Question 5, do you have a plan for solving my problem? Okay, so let's say you're at a conference, or let's say your arena is you're school teachers. Say you're teaching elementary school to a group of school teachers, and you're there about using positive reinforcement or about some new program or something like that. Okay, and you're there, and their problem is, I don't know how to do this, or I don't know how to get my students to behave, and you're supposed to be really an expert at behavior. Okay, that's all great, but if you just say, I'm an expert and I understand your problem and I know how I could solve it, but I'm not giving you a plan for actually solving that problem. It's just like, well, here's some ideas to think about. Then they want to know, well, in other words, are you give me something, a takeaway? Can I take away ideas or a list that I can go follow those step by step and maybe have a chance at solving this problem? Next question, can I trust you? Do you have integrity? Are you going to deliver what you say? If you're asking for my money, well, will you pocket it and run off to Paris, or is it going to be worth it? Are you refunding it if I don't like it, and whatever you're promising? Okay, can I trust you? And the last question is, do I like you? This is especially important, I think, if the action you want somebody to take is to pay you to coach them or work with them in some way, because we tend to gravitate to working with people we like. And in fact, that's probably wise, because I bet all of you have at least once had the experience of finding somebody who's an expert, highly rated, or they get, 5 stars, or they're supposed to be the best in the business. And you sort of think, well, that person's kind of a jerk, but they're supposed to be good. So my question then is, how'd that work out for you? Because it's probably wasn't pretty, because you got to trust your gut too and say, yeah, I'm going to spend time. I want to spend time with somebody I enjoy. Okay, so those are the 7 questions. And after they sort of answer who you are, you want to get a yes to every one of those. Okay, or if you can get a yes to every one of those, whatever you want them to do, or whatever your response you want, especially as related to improving your business or your career or making you feel more fulfilled, you're far more likely to get. And why do I give you that information, which you sort of instinctively knew anyway? Because I'm here to maintain that the fastest, most powerful, and most effective way you can get a yes to all those 7 questions is by telling great stories. Because a well-told story about yourself or about someone who has benefited from you, your process, your product, the stories that are defined by that this is how you learned what you're going to share, this is how you succeeded, or this is how one of my clients or customers succeeded. Okay. Stories delivering that are the ones that are going to answer those questions most positively. Get your yes most often. And the reason I maintain that stories are the most effective way of doing it is because if you're asking someone to take action, if you're trying to persuade someone to do something, at the end of the day, the reason they say yes, it could be that they've been thinking about all your data and all your testimonials and da 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 da. But the reason they say yes, or the decision on what they're going to do, is an emotional decision. Ultimately, they're not going to say yes if they don't feel like saying yes is going to benefit them in some way. And that means that you want to elicit an emotional response from your audience. You want to get your audience to feel. And the way to elicit emotion most powerfully is through stories. Because storytellers, and you know, whether you're talking about storytellers that get paid for their story, like screenwriters or filmmakers or novelists, or people who get paid for their speeches or as consultants and so on, but those who can elicit emotion are the most likely to succeed, the most likely to be successful. And if your goal, as it must be as a storyteller, is to elicit emotion, the emotion picture capital of the world is Hollywood. The industry, without the industry who throughout history and worldwide has been the most effective at eliciting emotion with story, is Hollywood. It's movies and television. And so if you can apply Hollywood story principles to the stories you're telling, then those are the ones that are going to help you maximize the emotional experience for your audience. And as luck would have it, I'm familiar with Hollywood because I've been working in Hollywood for 40 years now. And so everything I talk about, when I talk about storytelling, even though it's not necessarily directed just at filmmakers and screenwriters, but everything about story for anyone is based on what makes Hollywood movies work, what separates blockbuster movies or highly rated TV shows from the ones that tank or don't get made in the first place. So that's sort of my, I refer to myself sometimes as a one-trick pony, because my one trick is I know about stories, but my trick is based pretty much entirely, actually not pretty much, it's all based on what I have either learned or witnessed or developed on my own about the most effective processes for storytelling in Hollywood for movies and TV. Okay, so with that as my confessed prejudice and my point of view, what I want to share then is a list, what I consider to be the 9 essential components of every great story. In other words, if your story is to be considered great, or really if your story, for your story to be as powerful as you want it to be, as persuasive and effective and as transformative and life-changing as you want it to be, it needs to include or achieve these 9 essential elements. Okay, so item number 1, essential element number 1, your story must have a hero whose desire will drive the story forward. Okay? Now, got to clarify some of those terms. First of all, when I talk about the hero of the story, I'm talking about the main character. That's it. I'm talking about the protagonist. If you prefer to substitute protagonist for hero, groovy, that's fine. It's the character who's the main character in the story. It's the character we're most rooting for in the story. It's the character we feel the greatest connection to. It's the character who, whatever their desire is, defines what that story is about. Okay? And it's the character, and that desire, whatever desire it is that the hero wants, it's the pursuit of that desire that's going to drive the story forward. Okay? So, just one second. Okay. So it's if you're telling, let's say you're telling your own story. This was a story where you were on the swim team in high school. Okay. So two things about that. Most likely, if I were to coach you on that, I'd say, okay, then probably, unless you're talking about being in that situation and some tangential thing happening, probably want to build that story around wanting to win a gold medal, lead your team to victory in the state championship, whatever it might be. Or maybe it's just you weren't on the team, but you were learning to swim. And if only you could just swim well enough to get to the other side of the pool, that could be a compelling story too. Okay. But once you decide what that goal is, then this is the story about you being able to or achieving swimming across the swimming pool. And that means that now you have a hero, you, with a goal, with a desire that's going to drive the story forward. Everything in that story is now got to connect to your desire to swim across the pool. Okay? So that's number one. We'll be circling back to all these because they all sort of come together off and on. Okay, number two. I'm just glancing over here because I want to make sure I know the 9, but I sometimes get them out of sequence. Okay. The second thing every great story has is a setup. And what I mean by the setup is just the opening of the story. At the opening of the story, we are introduced to your hero living her everyday life before she begins pursuing whatever the desire is that we just decide is going to define the story. So I don't want to stay with swimming across the pool, but once I get a story in my head, I sort of lock into it, and then I'll come up with some other examples as well. Okay. Well, I gave you another example of Al Zenek's story, and I'll come up with some different ones too. But in Al's story, the hero, we decided, was the father, and his goal was to go rescue his children from this threatening situation. Okay. But that means that if you're telling the story from his point of view, you need to open the story with us seeing what his everyday life was like before he gets that call. When Al was going to, as a child, was going to be the story, then it would be, you know, if he had made himself the hero, which he was originally going to do, as I think he was 6 or 7, as a 7-year-old boy, then we would have needed to see what's his everyday life like before his mother had this meltdown or whatever. So you don't want to jump into the story when the hero is already pursuing the goal, because then the audience hasn't had a chance to find out, well, who is this person we're rooting for? They also haven't had a chance to get transported into the world you're creating by creating a movie in the audience's mind so they can picture what's going on. That may be later too. I may be jumping the gun with that one. But but they also, without the setup, you won't have had the opportunity to do item number 3. Item number 3 is you must create empathy with the hero during that setup. Okay, so You introduce your hero living his everyday life before he starts going after what the goal that defines the story is. And so that means we need to picture who he is. We need to know, like, where is he? Are we going to meet him when he's at home or at work? Or is he, what does he do day by day? Or is he taking his kids to school? Or is he, could even be on vacation or something like that? But we're seeing, this is a picture of what it's like the setup. It's like where you're saying to your audience, this is who my hero was yesterday. In fact, this is who my hero was last week too. Been this character for some time. This is his everyday life. Okay. And so, but it also is your opportunity to create a psychological connection between your audience and your hero. Because the way stories work, one of the ways stories work to create emotion is when if your audience empathizes with your hero, subconsciously they become that character as they are hearing the story. And so as a result, they're experiencing the emotion of the story through that character. And this is one of the things Hollywood gets very well, and examples abound. Well, you could pick any of your favorite movies and I can show you how it creates empathy and we become that character. But take a movie like Titanic, kind of an old movie, but still one of the biggest ever. Okay, why? I mean, Titanic did not make, I don't know, I certainly think it topped 1 billion worldwide. It might have been way more than that. I mean, now it's not number one because Marvel, makes that on every movie or something. But anyway, hugely successful. And I assume most of you have seen it. And by the way, if you haven't seen Titanic, probably never will, So anyway, but the hero is Rose, okay? And so Titanic is not interesting because it's informative to see a ship sink in 1912. Might be those things, but it's emotional because we become Rose and experience being on the Titanic, falling in love with Jack, and trying to survive the sinking ship. That's why a zillion billion people around the world went to see it, because we want to be there. That's why in Marvel movies, we become the hero. It's like we want to figure that we can swing through the air like Spider-Man or do whatever confusing thing Doctor Strange is doing. I haven't even been to the latest one because I could hardly follow what he was doing in the last Spider-Man movie. But you see what I'm saying? It's like when you're telling the story, if you're telling a story about yourself, when you were a child, then you want your audience to see themselves as you. You want them to become the child because then they will experience the emotion through that character. And just make a note of this if someone would. I'm going to come back to that one principle about why it's so important that we experience things, why it's especially important to you in telling stories or in speeches and for business and things like that. But I don't want to give that away right away. But when I open it up for questions, somebody please say, you ask us to tell you to go back to item number 3 about empathizing. Okay, so a great story is going to create that empathy. Okay, so we've established the hero. The audience doesn't know what the goal is yet because this is just the setup. But you've established the hero, you've created empathy. Oh, wait, I forgot to tell you how to create empathy. That would probably be valuable too, wouldn't it? And that is, there are basically 3 ways you can get your audience to empathize with the hero of your story. Okay, the first is make the hero the victim of some undeserved misfortune. Because that psychological, that subconscious connection where we feel what they feel, which is actually the definition of empathy. That connection is created very strongly when we feel sorry for the other person. If you've ever seen a telethon, for whatever it might be. You know, some world crisis, some particular, medical situation, some, group going bankrupt or suffering from whatever. Any telethon to help people out who are in distress, you are always going to see stories on the telethon about individuals who are experiencing the earthquake in Haiti, or the fires in California, or the flood in New Orleans, or the particular disease or whatever it might be. Because that's the way you get people emotionally involved in enough. It's nice. We may contribute money to fires or to not having fire, but what we're really contributing money to is to help the firefighters or the victims of the fire who are the victims of that undeserved misfortune. Okay, so it's the reason telethons we'll get more money if we can create a sympathy. Well, the same with you. It's the same principle. When you're telling the story and you want us to connect with your hero, whether it's you or even if it's a famous historical figure and you're telling a story about someone who influenced you or a client you had or whatever, that will do it. Second reason we empathize, if we worry about the character. So if you put the character in jeopardy, then that's going to increase empathy. Now, you see this a lot in Hollywood because, that's one of the reasons there's a lot more movies about cops, spies, superheroes who are going to save the world than there are about, CPAs or public speakers. I'm sorry to say for that reason, because if you're a public speaker, the danger is great because that's people's greatest fear, apparently. But anyway, get my point. It's like we want to see stories. We'll empathize, and that's why we empathize with superheroes. That's why we empathize with Indiana Jones or something. This is just an aside, and I succumb to asides frequently. But one way you might think you create empathy is to create a character who has a common experience with your audience. Now, up to a point, that's okay. In other words, if you've got an audience of safety inspectors, and you tell a story about a safety inspector, okay, that's good. They would have some identification with that. But if that character is not empathetic to them, it was just they have the same job, that's not going to really cut it so much. But in movies, it has nothing to do with that. It's like people don't gravitate to movies because their life is like the audience's life. In fact, very much we gravitate to movies where we can get away from our real life because we have to deal with that 24/7. So in Indiana Jones, how many people who saw Indiana or Raiders of the Lost Ark or whatever, there's a new one coming up next year, I guess. How many people who saw that went because they also were archaeological soldiers of fortune in the 1930s? Probably not so many, but we went to it because that character was in danger all the time. In fact, his everyday life was such that the very opening scene threatened his life in about 4 different ways, the things caving in, the boulder, the spear throwing natives, and whatever it was. And just to beat this over the head, but I like to share this situation because it always struck me funny. When I started out in Hollywood, I started as a reader, just reading scripts for agents and producers and whatever. And then eventually I got a job or had several jobs for different producers finding stories. Okay, so people would then come and pitch me their ideas for their script in the hope that I would bring it into the company and maybe the producer I worked for would make the movie. And so every once in a while I get a meeting like this, but on this particular meeting, there was this writer coming in and he said, well, I've got this script. And one of the signs that a script is not going to be very good is when the writer says it's going to make more money than, at that time, it was going to make more money than Star Wars, okay, or whatever, back when I was starting out. Because you know it's not, because nothing's going to make more money. Nothing that just came in over the transit was going to make more money than Star Wars or any of the others. But I don't remember if this writer said that or not, but he said, this is going to make a fortune because this movie is about a bowler. And do you know that 50 million people in the United States bowl? And I said, no, I did not know that. But I said, the problem with that argument is, number one, those 50 million bowlers, they're not going to go see the movie because they're bowling. They don't go to the movies, they go bowling. And the other reason is that's not why people go to the movies. It's like even bowlers think bowling is a boring idea for a movie. That's why bowling movies never make any money. Okay, so empathy doesn't have to do with what you might logically think, which is commonality with the audience. Now there is a way you want to make it common, but that won't happen until we get to item 9, the last item on the list. Okay, so first way to create empathy, get us to feel sorry, undeserved misfortune. Second method, put them in jeopardy because we empathize with people we worry about. Third way is to make the character likable. Okay? Because we empathize with people we care about, that we like. Okay, but how do you do that? What makes a character likable? Now, a character can be likable if they're very funny, but unless you're a certain type of speaker who's really sharp with creating comedy that'll carry through the whole character, that may or may not be there. But what always will make a character likable is they are loving and giving to other people. So if you introduce your hero in the setup and show that they are kind, generous, and loving, then that's a character that we're going to empathize with more. And one thing I'm going to point out, I'm not going to explain it entirely, but I'm going to point out is that those 3 methods of creating empathy are all built on conflict, because we feel sorry for someone because of conflict they've had in the past that we learn about in the setup, or that they're having right then. They're poor, or they're stuck, or they're, in a bad situation. The second one is we worry about people because of the conflict that is lying ahead, something that might happen to them. In movies, it's life or death, but in your speeches, it doesn't have to be that kind of jeopardy. It could be danger of losing a job, danger of losing, in jeopardy from a disease. It could be danger of losing the love of their life. It could be jeopardy that they'll always be alone if you're telling a story about someone who just, was desperate to be in a relationship, whatever it might be. Okay, but that's all conflict in the future, or that awaits the person. And likability is, how does your hero help other people with the conflict they face? Okay, so I'll just set that there. There's more to be said about that, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, item number 4. Now you've got your setup is done. You've introduced your hero, shown their everyday life in a particular situation or whatever, and shown them or created empathy with them because you show how they are sympathetic, in jeopardy, or likable. Okay, now it's time to get the story moving forward, because now you've laid the groundwork. So the next essential component is your story needs an opportunity. Actually, if you look at the list, because I use these things interchangeably, you can say it needs an opportunity / crisis / tipping point. They all mean the same thing, in a way, but they all have sort of different shading to them. But you can look at it as any way. The way this came about is when I lecture about screenwriting and all the presentations I've made in my book on screenwriting or my 2 books, I call it opportunity because that was just the word I came up with. And then the problem with that is opportunity, we tend to think that sounds like something good. You don't think I've got an opportunity to lose my home. So then I thought, well, so a lot of times, like in my book, Storytelling Made Easy, which is designed for speakers and entrepreneurs and so on, I use the term crisis, okay? And I use that in my book, I talk about the 6-step success story process. You'll hear a little about that later, okay? So I call it crisis, but then the reason I like tipping point is it's the moment in the hero's life when they ended the inertia they were experiencing, when something happened that made them move out of that everyday life and start taking action. It's going to force them to take some action. Okay? It's going to propel the hero. Now, the crisis doesn't necessarily define the goal. It could. All the crisis says is, this is what moved the character from complacency to action. And what that action will involve is always going to be figuring out, what am I going to do, first of all? What is this event? But the point about whether you call it opportunity or crisis or tipping point, and this can be kind of tricky when you're developing your story for your speech, but that is, you need to think of what is the single specific event that made the character take action. And the reason that can be tricky is because we don't generally think of our lives in that way. So let's say you're telling a story about, say you're telling a story when you became a speaker. Okay, because, you didn't come into this world a speaker. So somewhere along the line, you decided, I'm going to be a speaker. I'm going to give a speech at least, So just, and you can make it the story of when you decided to join Toastmasters or whatever, but we'll just stay with the speaking thing. Okay, so if I said to you, okay, what happened that made you become a speaker? Probably, and it's not that this isn't true, because probably this is all true, you would say something like, I just felt like I was stuck in my job. I just got tired. I just felt like I wanted to have impact on people. I've been thinking about it since I gave a speech in school, wondering why did I never go back and do that? And I just thought that should be fun. I think I'll join Toastmasters. Okay, that all may be true, but none of those were either crisis or opportunity or tipping point. Because what I'm saying for the sake of the story is, you need to go back and say, what is the event that finally moved me to stop thinking about it or talking about it or daydreaming about it or being stuck regarding it as a pipe dream. And I actually decided to take a step toward that. I actually decided, okay, I'm going to go to a Toastmasters meeting or whatever the first step was. Okay. And that's going to take some work, because when we think back, we think, like when I decided to come to Hollywood, okay, because I had dreamed for as long as I can remember, I've thought I would love to work in the movie business. But as soon as I had that thought, I told myself, well, that's crazy. Nobody really does that. That's just a pipe dream. And I never even told anybody. The whole time I was growing up or when I was in college, finally I told some of my friends. They knew I loved movies. Everybody knew I loved movies. But that I would actually work in Hollywood, that seemed stupid. And so I taught school I went and got a master's in education, taught Head Start for 3 years, fiddled around, ended up in Phoenix working as a rehab person or job developer, which believe me was not my calling for sure. It was fun because I enjoyed spending the winter in Phoenix with my friends, but nonetheless. And then finally I came to Hollywood. So I've been working on this or thinking about this or avoiding this for decades. Okay. And in reality, if you said, well, what finally, I would have a different answer now because I forced people to come up with the answer, but I would have said, well, I finally decided if I don't do it now, I never will. Well, that's not a tipping point. That's just another way of thinking of it. What I'll share with you, I don't think I've shared this before in public, but what finally happened was I was dating a woman in Phoenix. And I'd always thought I'd want to do this, but I was not. I was there because I didn't have anything else to do. And I got to work at the same place with 2 of my best friends. Okay. So I was dating a woman and she was a nurse and she got accepted to a school program so she could become a nurse, an anesthetist nurse or whatever, a special, graduate program. And so she was going to have to move to LA. And so I thought, well, I could go with her and then I'd be there and then I could move into Hollywood. Okay. Because obviously fear was one of the things keeping me back. And I thought, well, at least this way I'll have, some emotional support. And then if it doesn't work out, then I can always go do something else, and so on. But her getting the tipping point for me was when she said, I got into this program and I'm moving to LA. And I said, me too. And it's a sign of how that was just an excuse. The fact that our relationship didn't hardly lasted a week once we got there and I was off finding a place of my own, but it didn't matter. It got me to LA and that was it. And that's when it started. Okay. I don't know. That's not one of my treasured stories. I'm not going to enter that into the Toastmasters competition, but I thought you might enjoy just hearing a little of the seamy underbelly of my past. Okay. So what you got to figure out is what was the tipping point for the hero? And here's the way I usually suggest you look at it, or when I'm coaching speakers and they're trying to say, what's the tipping point? And I'll say, okay, look, when I said, let's say it's about speaking. I said, if you went to your first Toastmaster meeting on Thursday, and you weren't doing anything to pursue speaking on Tuesday, something happened on Wednesday because you could have gone in Tuesday instead of Thursday. Something changed your mind. And I know really it might have just been, I just couldn't say, put it off anymore, but there was still that thing, you want to quit that job for a long time, but you finally got the memo that broke the camel's back and you said, nope. This is it. I can't take any more of these stupid memos. I'm out of here. Okay. So that's what you need by the tipping point. Okay. So that's number 4. Now let me do this. We're going to open it up for questions. Actually, no, let me not. I was going to open it now, but let's not do that. Just if you have any questions as we go along, I'm going to open it up for questions after I talk. So if you have questions as we go through this, then jot them down, and then I'll answer as many as I can. Because you could actually there should be here. Maybe there's not. Sometimes there is there. If maybe you guys have already set this up. I don't know. So don't let me step on any toes because I forgot to talk to the team that's behind the scenes and so on. But so open up and tell us if there's a better way to do this. But if you come up with questions as we go along, then you can enter them into chat, and then I'll have my team that's helping me, the Zoom squad, look and pick out the questions. Just one thing, if you're going to put a question in chat, put a capital Q : So as the team goes through, they'll know how to spot the questions and not the real chatting back and forth or comments and stuff like that. And also be aware that if you're going to ask, if you're jotting down a question, make sure it's about something I've already discussed, because otherwise you might be asking something that is actually in item 8. Okay. So I have to apologize one sec. I am sweltering here. I don't know what it's like back in Indiana, but it'd be hot here. So I'm going to shut off the camera for like 10 seconds because I don't want to be walking away. And I'll be right back, but I've got to go turn on the air conditioner and see if you can still hear me. So chat amongst yourselves. I'll be right back.
Well, fantastic, everybody. If you can, while Michael is off turning up the air conditioning, and I know it was hot because I was just there and I sunburned my lips. So I know it is really hot there right now. If you have any questions, throw it in the chat right now. And when Michael comes back, we will start to share those with him. But again, start your question with a capital Q and a colon. So it's easier for all of us to sort through the chat messages so we can find those messages where they are. Okay, so now in the background is my air conditioner. Is that bothering anybody's ability to hear me? Okay, because even if it is, it might be better not hear as well, but not watch the sweat dripping down my face. Also, you can see behind me, I opened the door. So it kind of hurts the ambiance of my perfect office behind me. And you may see Lucy, my dog, wandering in to see what's going on now, but that's okay. Or you'll hear her barking in the background. Okay, so we're at number 5. Okay, number 5, the next thing is, the next essential component is a goal that we can envision that establishes the specific outcome we want the hero to achieve. I sort of mumble that, I'm reading it, so it'll be the same as on your list. Okay, so the essential component is a goal that we can envision. Now, I said at the beginning, you need a hero whose desire will drive the story forward. Okay, so desire could include a desire to be a great speaker, a desire to be rich, a desire to be successful, a desire to be accepted, a desire to, you name it. Or it could be, well, okay, those are good examples. But those aren't the kind of goals I'm talking about, because those goals don't have visible endpoints. Okay? And another good example of this would be any story you're telling about some kind of, say, medical or physical situation, some kind of addiction. So let me just use this because I just encountered this recently, and a script, basically. It wasn't for speech, but same principle. It's a script about someone who for years had been hooked on a drug of some kind. Okay. And so obviously in the script, the goal was for him to stop taking heroin or cocaine or whatever. Okay. Or it might be, let's say it's a story about someone who had crippling arthritis. And so you're giving a speech to people who might have that because you have methods for making that better, for getting rid of it, whatever it might be. So the goal becomes get rid of the arthritis. But the problem with that is there's no end point. There's no finish line. And so for your audience who's, trying to connect, empathize with the hero, and we want to envision their success, we want to imagine what success will look like, it's very hard to envision with any clarity what does it look like to not be an addict? What does it look like to not have arthritis? Now, you can define that by the absence. Well, you're not limping as much, okay? But I'm going to tell a story about a guy who doesn't limp now. That's not very powerful either. So
what I like is it's like sports. You know, if you pick a sport, they generally play until someone, you know, until time is up and the one who has the most points wins, or whoever has the most points at the end of the quarter, or whoever scores to 21 in the world. Well, 21 is not a thing in World Series of Poker, but you see what I'm saying? It has an end point in sports, or in track. There's literally a finish line. That's why they put it there. They don't just say, let's let a bunch of people run around and decide who's fastest. You know, that'd be hard to follow and so on. It's who crossed it. It's like Kentucky Derby. Who got to the finish line first? Okay. So what you want to do is avoid the temptation to get caught up in those generalized endings that don't have finish lines, or to get caught up in the inner life of the character. Like when you say, okay, somebody wants to be successful or somebody wants to be accepted. Well, I have no idea what that looks like. And the definition of success is different for everybody. So what you want to do is you want to take that story and figure out, okay, or ask yourself, how would we know? How will the audience know that the hero has actually accomplished this desire? How will we know that the person is successful? How will we know? What would that look like? And so here's some ways you can approach that. One is you have, let's say they want to be financially successful. They want to be rich. Okay, then you at least add a dollar figure to that. So someone's in poor, they couldn't even afford rent. It's a story about how they became an, you know, a cyber currency investor. And if the story's about, and then a year later they were rich, it's like, but if that character, if your hero says to someone, if I could just make $100,000, or pick the number, $100,000 to buy myself a condo. This is not an LA story. you could $100,000 maybe get, you know, a garden shed, but nothing much more. Okay, but you see my point. Attach a dollar amount. Okay, another way you can do it is to think of something that will exhibit the change. So let's go back to the arthritis person. Okay, so instead of, this is a guy who had crippling arthritis, he really wanted to get his life back or be able to live a normal life. None of that has a finish line. But instead, tell a story about the arthritis sufferer who learns that his daughter is engaged and is going to get married in 6 months. And his daughter wants him to walk her down the aisle. And he can barely walk. And he says, oh my God, you know, all her life, I dreamed of walking her down the aisle, and now I won't be able to because I've got this. And now it's about what he found, your process for overcoming arthritis that he found, that the story is about how he did the things to overcome it. And then the climax is he's walking his daughter down the aisle. Now, I want to ask you, you can raise your hand or not. I'm going to take it as a yes, or you can wave if you want to. How many, when you just heard me say that, pictured a father walking his daughter down the aisle? Anybody? Okay, come on, Jane, you did too. You're not raising your hand, Jane, but I know you must have. Okay, now, Jane's already writing her story, I think, so she's not hearing me. Okay, so the idea is that's visible. We're now rooting for something we can picture what it looks like. We want to know, it's like a movie. We want to know what the end is going to look like. We don't want to know how the hero is going to be able to get there, if they're going to get there, but we want to be able to picture what success would be. And a story, and a daughter walking his daughter down the aisle, believe me, is a lot more emotionally involving and fulfilling and satisfying than a guy who says, oh man, my arthritis is so much better. So that's what I mean by visible finish line. And by the way, you may not believe me, but of the 9 things I'm going to share with you, this is the hardest one. And I've never been entirely sure why. And this has been true since I first started lecturing about screenwriting in about 1980. Okay. And that is, for some reason, even though you know the words I mean, when I say we want a visible finish line, something that it's like if I ask you, what is your hero's goal? And you tell me what it is, if I can picture that, and everybody else on this call can picture it, and we all get the same picture, then you've got a good goal. At least it's visible. Okay. So you understand what I'm saying. The words are pretty simple, but putting that into practice is tough because we tend not to think about life that way so much. I mean, if we're involved in a sport, sure. But when it comes to these other things or the things you're talking about, it's tough. But trust me, it makes a world of difference to the story. When we have a picture, we can envision, this is what I want to see happening. That's the way people will think about it or talk about it. I listened to your story and I really wanted to see him walking his daughter down the aisle, and you never showed them anything. There was all that movie in their mind. Okay, number 6, moving right along. Conflict. Now, I said this would come up because I talked about conflict being the basis of creating empathy. But a great story includes the hurdles and obstacles the hero must overcome to achieve the goal. Okay, if it's just, well, this is a story when I mean, you've all heard stories like this. I decided I wanted to be a teacher, just like my dad was. And so I went to college and I got a master's degree in education. And then I applied and I got this job working with the New York City public schools. And now I'm a teacher. The end. That's Lucy. That's a boring story. Now you could make a riveting story about somebody who wants to follow in their footsteps, the footsteps of their father, and be a teacher, but it's not going to be riveting. It's not going to have any emotion unless we know the obstacles they had to overcome, and unless they suffer some failure along the way, unless it's a very up and down sort of thing. Because if your primary objective is to elicit emotion, emotion grows out of conflict. Desire does not create emotion. Desire moves the story forward. Desire is what we're rooting for and want to envision, but the emotional moments are going to be when the hero must face and eventually overcome the obstacles they face, both external and internal. And on top of that, the greater the obstacles, the greater the emotion. So if you're choosing between 2 stories about yourself, and you have 2 situations where you accomplish something that you think could be a good story to share, then all other things being equal, pick the one with more conflict. Pick the one that was harder to achieve, because that'll be more emotional. Okay? Everybody with me? Anybody not hear that because of Lucy saving me from whatever Amazon delivery person was out there apparently? Okay. So you got to add conflict. Number 7, you want a climax that reveals the hero achieving the goal. In other words, this is one of the reasons you want that very specific finish line. But if you were to tell a story about, the arthritis father, and you said, and then told the story and said, and finally he was able to walk her down the aisle. Okay, well, yeah, I guess you could call it a climax, but you're robbing your audience of the emotional victory that they have experienced. Okay, because remember, your audience, every person in your audience has become that father. They want to have that experience of walking their daughter down the aisle, even if it's a woman in the audience who has no children, is not married, it doesn't matter, because that woman has become an arthritic father who has a daughter getting married. Okay, so if you don't actually have in the story and give it some vivid description and actually show us, tell us what's happened, then we don't get to celebrate our victory because we were able to do it. You know, it becomes like an afterthought, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so, and that climax, number 7, is essential, but it can't be the end of the story, because the 8th essential component is there must be an aftermath to the story. And by aftermath, I mean it is a picture, it's a new scene, if you will, or maybe even more, but it's a picture. It allows us to see and experience the new life that the hero of your story is now living. So walking, I got stuck on arthritis, so I'll finish that one, but walking his daughter down the aisle, that would be a very emotional climax. And then you want to end the story by saying, and Ralph, or whatever name the hero is, and it's now been 5 years since Ralph walked his daughter down that aisle. And since then, he's become pain-free. He's now back to playing tennis competitively, or he da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. This is the life he's living now. And that's a huge one in internet marketing. It's huge everywhere, but it comes up a lot with internet marketing, because with internet marketing stories, a lot of times the goal is just, you do this and you'll be wealthy or whatever, and so on. But that you need an endpoint. You need to set an amount of money that's an endpoint. But also, just because the person achieved that particular goal, it's not tapping into what internet marketers really want. They want to flourish. They want success and wealth, but they also want the life of their dreams for their family. Now that could be true. That's true for an abundance of other areas, but I do a lot of coaching with internet marketers. And so it's really critical that whatever skill that they are imparting, whatever they're trying to persuade to coach somebody or to buy an online course or whatever, that there's an end point to what they've done. But then it's even more powerful to say, and since then, and now, that was X amount of time ago, and now, or you create a scene with, them on their yacht with their family in the Mediterranean. Okay, not because everybody wants a yacht, but because almost all the people in that arena want wealth, independence, and free time with their family. But that wouldn't be a climax their climax wouldn't be, I want to sail in the Mediterranean with my boat. Okay, so you want to have that aftermath. One way you can look at it is it's like the setup and the aftermath are the two ends of this journey. It's like this is the everyday life of the hero before they went after this goal. And now here's the everyday life of the hero after having achieved that, after completing that journey. Okay. So that brings us to, oh, I know. You don't have to remind me. I'm going to say it now because I meant to with the climax and aftermath. So let's go back to what was it? Empathy. Okay. And remember, empathy is how you get your audience to psychologically become the hero of your story and experience emotion through them. Okay. So let's say that you are a consultant, some kind, trainer consultant, but your goal is to get people to work with you, coach with you, hire you to help them do X. Okay. So let's say you're a dog trainer and you're giving speeches about that and you want people to hire you doing that. And you tell a story about one of your clients who hired you as a dog trainer. Okay. And you create empathy with that client because of the pain they were experiencing because their dog misbehaved. Much like the pain I'm experiencing when Lucy barks while I'm trying to lecture, but she doesn't get the picture. Obviously, I'm in need of one of these speakers who knows how to train dogs. Okay. So let's say that that's your thing. That's your you want to persuade them to hire you as a dog trainer. So you tell a story about the client. And then as you tell it, the goal is to get their dog to behave. And then the pursuit that they go, the steps of the story are them moving, doing what's necessary to achieve that goal and overcoming the obstacles. Okay. The climax is the dog, let's say they wanted to teach the dog to, a lot of dog things are not do this, but they wanted to teach the dog to, roll over. Okay, that's kind of mild. I'm trying to think what, I don't want to say not bark. They wanted to teach their dog to greet the postman in a friendly, loving way when they growl and bark. Okay. So that's what they do. That's what the hero of the story wants. You're not the hero. Okay. You're the guide. You're the mentor. You're the, what I call the reflection character. You're the wise old man that's going to help them. But your audience is empathizing with that person. The audience wants their dog to be well trained. Doesn't have to be just about a mailman, but they want that. Now, they've become your hero, and that means they have had the emotional experience of working with you and ending up with a well-trained dog. That means that at the end of that story, they have already had the experience of working with you without you ever doing anything to sell your wares because they become a hero. It's like, this is one of the ways stories are so important when it comes to persuasion in business, because you could get up there and talk all day about your technique for dog training and your statistics and how many happy dogs you've trained and how much da. But none of that is going to give your audience the actual emotional feeling of working with you. But now for them to decide to work with you, it's like, well, they already have. Now they don't think about it that way. This is like hocus pocus. This is like, mesmerizing them. But that's how it works. That's why stories can be so powerful in that arena, or in the arena of persuasion. Okay, and then finally that brings us to number 9. And that is the last essential. And this is really the thing that I can perhaps argue that it's not totally essential, but this is the good thing that's going to separate you from everybody else. And this is the thing that is going to convince your audience that you get them, you understand them, that it's almost all those questions can be answered, and certainly answered more powerfully by including that. and that is transformation. It means every good story is about change. It's about changing the circumstances of the hero and changing the external circumstances. So they've got more money or they're healthier or whatever. And the circumstances of everyone who touches that hero. So believe me, there's going to be an external transformation of that guy's daughter and his wife, if she was there at the wedding too, and so on and so on. Okay. But the deepest level is we're talking about how the hero changes as a result of having taken that journey. It's what I call the inner journey of the character. And what I mean by the inner journey of the character is actually the hero's transformation to living in fear, to living courageously. In fact, when I told you that little bit I told you about Al Zenek's story at the beginning, and I said, you want to make your dad the hero because he's the one, to me, who showed the most courage. And that was good because he was supposed to talk about courage, but it's also because it doesn't matter that everybody in the audience wasn't like that one woman who said, yeah, that happened to me. Doesn't matter if anything like that happened to the rest of the audience, they still gave him a standing ovation because even though everyone in that audience, or only one person in the audience, may have had the experience of being rescued by their father from a crisis at home, everybody in the audience has had the experience of being terrified of taking too much responsibility. And if you can go to that level of fear, because he wasn't so much afraid that he was going to, be physically harmed if he went to get him. But when you get to the level of the fear that the hero has at the beginning, and the wounds that preceded the story that instilled that fear in the person, if you get to that level, especially if you're talking autobiographical story, if you go back to the story about being a public speaker, it's fine to say, well, I was always afraid of speaking, but that doesn't really take us there. But if you, in the story, figured out what was the wound from the past that terrified you about getting in front of an audience, and you're willing to share that and show how the steps you took in becoming a public speaker forced you to, but also helped you to overcome that fear in spite of that protective shell you have around yourself that we all have, that identity, that persona we carry to protect us from what we were afraid of out of this world. If you share that, that's when you're going to connect with and impact your audience at the deepest level. Because again, now you can talk to an audience that isn't afraid necessarily of public speaking or doesn't even care to be a public speaker. But those deeper fears, those fears down deep are universal, because we've all been wounded. Nobody gets out of adolescence unwounded. Never met one anyway. Or it could be a recent thing, but it could be, a father who was too demanding, or a mother who expected perfection, or a mother who was overly clingy and loving, or a mother who abandoned, or a father who whatever. Or it could be events or wounds in school, or it could be something later. Usually wounds are primarily in adolescence. But even though those wounds lead to fears that are universal, we're all afraid at times we're not good enough. We're all afraid at times that we shouldn't be too big for our britches. We're all afraid at times that we're going to look bad. We're all afraid at times that we're going to fail. Failure isn't as big a fear as some others. Failure, we say we're afraid of failure, but generally speaking, fear is of the unknown, and we're all pretty familiar with failing. but what we might be the deeper fear might be, I don't want to be humiliated. I don't want to be judged that way. I don't want to have to take, we're all afraid of responsibility, you know, the same ones. And so when you get at that level, you know, whoever your audience is, you're talking about obstacles and conflict that they've all experienced. And that's where the deepest emotion comes, out of the deepest conflict. And there you go. That's number 9. And there I go. The aftermath is you're going to be great at telling stories now, but I guess I should create a bigger finish about that. But maybe I'll come up with one because I want to answer questions now. But those are really the thing. I mean, if you tell a story from the stage that has all 9 of these elements, you're going to knock them dead. I guarantee you. You have no idea the power of all this when you put all these things together. Okay, so I'm going to get off my soapbox now because I get a little fiery because when I talk about stories and these things, because this is sort of where I live and these are so powerful and mean a lot. So let me turn to the Zoom quad. I'm not going to go look at the chat because I'm not good at that. So I'm going to leave it to you guys, whoever's in charge of the Zoom quad, to pick the questions that you, I don't know how many there are, but pick the ones you think would be most valuable, and then I'll see what I can do. And you can still keep asking questions, especially if there's anything that I said that you're confused about or so on, by all means ask. And I'll stick around to answer whatever I can.
Well, Michael, before we get into questions, I just recognize what an amazing job you just did with this entire presentation. So first, as a district, please unmute yourself and give it up for Michael Hauge before we get into the questions, because that was phenomenal.
I'm blown away. I'm blown away so much. Thank you so much.
Ridiculously good. And now if you can unmute yourself again, because we've got a ton of questions here. We're going to start going down through some of them here. Kathy, you asked the first question probably about, looks like almost an hour ago. So Kathy, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, you know, I noticed this in movies too, that some movies really needed more of a backstory on the characters, and then others just go way too far. And my question had to do with the setting up the everyday life of the hero. And how far do you go with that, the details of that?
Well, so are you more concerned about backstory, or you're more concerned about the okay, I'm going to answer whichever one you mean. I'm going to answer both of the things I heard. Okay. The question of any question about storytelling that begins how much has no answer because you can't attach a number. It's like, how many lines of dialogue should I have, or how many words, or how many examples should I give of the process of using my product or whatever. Okay, it's like you just test it out and see. It's got to be at least one, and generally speaking, less than a dozen, you know, depending on the length of the story. So you can't answer that. But so to some extent, you have to test it out and see how long it is, and go by how much, you know, if you've got a contest speech, what do you got, 8 minutes or something like that? If it's a keynote, you might have 20, well, depending on what the organization is, what they consider and so on. So that defines it. But as a general rule, 2 or 3 is kind of a magic number when it comes to details. So what do you want to, I'm sorry, you had a very succinct question. My answers are almost never succinct. But let's say you're creating a setup. Okay, first thing, understand the setup is a scene. It's not a year in the life of, it's not even a day in the life of, it's a scene.
Okay.
And you could stretch that maybe into two, but it's just enough to create a picture of what the everyday life of the character is and have them in that scene do something, experience something, say things that'll reveal, that'll create that empathy. Okay. And so the way to decide about detail with that, because you want to create this movie, you need detail and you need some dialogue, because if there's dialogue in it, we want to hear the dialogue, not, and this is another aside, and you probably heard this from other Toastmaster speakers or so on, and that is try to avoid saying, so I said that, and then she said that, and I said that this. In other words, just say the dialogue. Okay, don't go on so long that it sounds like you're reciting, a play, but just say it. Okay, so you want dialogue, you want detail, you want to create, you want to draw us into the world you've created. So what you do is you imagine you're there watching what's happening with your hero and where your hero is, and you take a picture of it. Okay. And then you look at the picture and you write down everything we can see in that photo. And then you write down everything we can hear and anything we can smell and what's going on. But you get the point. You want to overload with detail. And then you say, okay, if I only could pick 2 or 3 of these details, what do I say? I mean, if you say that there's, cigarette butts and pizza boxes on the floor and duct tape over the window where it was once broken, I think we know enough, and you don't need to go on and on about what makes this place a hovel. Okay? But you would want to write those things down and a bunch of other things and then decide. So there's no hard and fast answer to that, because if reading scripts, there's sometimes lots of those, but if they're all captivating and so on, but I would say keep it to some sort of minimum. But the bigger issue is when the setup is not, it's not, you don't generalize, you don't broaden, you don't talk about, and because when I opened with a story about Al Zenek, the first thing I said was, it was this year, he was sitting in his office looking out over, I don't remember the wording exactly, looking out over Central Park, and then I said what he did. Now, I felt with that short story I was telling, that was probably enough. You didn't really know that much about what Al looked like, but, or so on. But I started by putting you in the scene before I said, and he was on the phone and he'd just been told da-da-da. Okay. The other thing you asked about was backstory. Now, backstory is different. Backstory is what happened to this hero prior to the story, prior to the setup that got them where they are. What's their education? Where did they grow up? Or what was their wound that is going to show up later, or whatever it is. Okay, you don't start with that. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It's not a hard and fast rule. I sometimes like to pretend everything I say is a hard and fast rule. But what I mean is, if you say, let's say it's a story about you, and say, well, if it was about me, I grew up in Salem, Oregon, and I went to the University of Oregon, and then I went to graduate school in Georgia and got a degree, and then I taught, and then I did this. But let me tell you about what happened when I was in Hollywood. Well, I've lost you already. I mean, well, not me, because I have such a riveting backstory, because how often do you get to meet somebody who grew up in Salem, Oregon? I mean, my God. But you get my point.
Yeah.
Just start at the setup. So let's say, I mean, this is what I've used with a number of people because they're business related. Let's say it's a story about having to find a new job. And in fact, I just did this. I have a client who's a naturopath, and she was creating this story because she wants to make presentations to other naturopaths on how they can build both the success of their business, but also turn it into a business that they have a normal life or a real life, and they're not just giving their all to only that one thing. So the way and we just tried the story out on her mastermind group, and they seemed to really like it. But so it opened, and she said, I woke up when my alarm went off at 7 o'clock. And for a split second, like every morning when I wake up, I ask myself, is it Saturday? And then she said, and then I realized, like almost every other day, no, it's not. I've got to go to work. And then she takes her dog for a walk, and she talks about, and I knew this was going to happen. And then well into it, she says, this is not what I bargained for. I went to school for 4 years after college to be a naturopath. And I dreamed this would happen, and I da. And so I started, so all that backstory is in there, that after we've already connected with her, and you don't have to wait as long as she did, but you could open in your office and something that's going on in the office and say, and then if you just, after you say that, say, see, the reason I was working then as this, and I've been working at that job for this long, or I was new or whatever. So you can fill in the backstory, but don't start with what preceded it. Start with that setup as a scene. Okay.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, that's all the time we have for it. I'm sorry, Scott, I'm gonna, or I forget who read that.
Me next. Do you have time for one more question?
Well, I was kidding. That's not all we have time for.
Okay. Well, so I was gonna say we have.
My belief is we have until 2 hours total, or did I miss? Was that?
No, you're good. No, we're good on time. You're fine.
Okay. Okay.
You got lots of questions in there, but
okay.
This one is
in streamline, and I'm sorry.
No worries at all. So this question is one that I've always been interested in. So our next question is from Myra. Myra, would you like to ask your question, please?
Sure, thank you. I write novels, and a long time ago, I wrote my very first novel, and an agent tried to sell it, and I kept being told that my main character had not undergone a fundamental transformation. She was just sorry she got caught. And I thought, well,
a fundamental transformation. I didn't hear that.
Right. And she was only sorry that she got caught doing what she'd been doing. And I thought, well, yeah, that's more like real life. Plus, I knew I wanted to write about her again, and I didn't want her to I didn't want to lose her best, most entertaining flaws, because then how would I write about her again? So how do you do the fundamental transformation when you want to write about a character again and you don't want to turn them into Mother Teresa so they can never do something interesting?
Okay, so let me see. I have my answer. It wouldn't be everybody's answer, and you probably won't like some of the answer, but the number one thing is what you're talking about doing is creating a character that you can use for a series of novels, and you want to use her again and again. And I believe that's if you hadn't been published already, if you hadn't had any novels, don't do that. Put everything into this novel. As long as she's alive at the end of the novel, you can use her again. But don't be writing a sequel when you're writing the first story. Don't be holding back on things because you're going to save them for the sequel. Now, I do a lot of work with romance writers, and they operate the opposite of that a lot of times because they can get deals for multiple sequels and so on. Or fantasy writers do that a lot too, although I haven't had that much experience there. So first thing you need to do is you need to just write this novel, and just as if there's never going to be another one. Okay, so this character goes through whatever transformation they need to go through to have completed their arc for this novel. Now, if her thing is she's just sorry she got caught, I would probably agree with that, because that's not really a transformation at all. The only transformation is, well, she did something wrong and then she got caught. And at the end, she's imprisoned and she was at the beginning, or whatever it was the issue was. But what we want is first of all, if she was doing something truly bad that she shouldn't have been doing, or that the reader will think is bad, then you've got to create a character in such a way that we, even though we may not agree with what she's doing morally, we still want her to come out okay because we empathize with her so deeply. And you create the empathy before you reveal her flaws.
Yeah.
And next of all, we want to see that she has grown from the experience. It's more than just learning something. She has changed because she recognized some fear that she was carrying, and she faced that fear and was able to overcome that. Now, there are variations. You can have characters who don't change, like, who is it? Who did, let's see, I think it's Patricia Highsmith. No, not that, I forget. But the movie with Matt Damon and Jude Law about Ripley. I mean,
Oh,
Ripley he never learned anything, but that was the way she set that up. But I'm assuming your story isn't like that. And by the way, she got away with a lot of sequels for that, but the way that movie was completely self-contained, it resolved everything to a certain way. So I think you want to go deeper into the arena of transformation and look at the inner journey. And if you, what I would recommend you watch for this is go to my website and purchase either the DVD, if you still like those, or the digital version of The Hero's Two Journeys.
I saw that.
Okay, because that's all about the outer journey and the inner journey. And if you do that and put sequeling out of your mind, you'll do better.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Okay. Who's next?
Michael, we're going to go for one more question.
Let's do this. Why don't you just read me the questions, and then if I need to ask something, because that'll speed it up. So just read me what the question is, and then I'll talk to whoever asked the question.
I tell you what, we're going to go for one more question, Michael.
Okay.
It is a fascinating question that Mandy asked, and it has to do with World War Z of all things. So I don't think that reading it is going to do the question justice. So we're going to go for one last question. But Mandy, why don't you ask your question, because it was so well written.
And is she getting is she entering the contest this year with a zombie story? Because I would like to see that, Mandy, if it's about World War Z. Okay, Mandy, let's hear this fascinating question.
So
I love the movie, by the way.
yeah, what was interesting about it, besides the fact that it had Brad Pitt in it, was that when you were talking about, I'm thinking about the stages that you go through each of these steps. And the thing that fascinated me to this day about that movie is that he was in jeopardy almost immediately when the movie started. I don't see that very often in movies, and I was wondering why that is. And the other part of the question is, how important is the timing of these steps that you've outlined in general?
Geez, I don't know how to answer any of that. I don't know how to answer a question, how important is it? I mean, if you're talking about screenwriting, the structural stages to a screenplay are pretty rigid. I mean, if you saw that same video, Here's Two Journeys, or read my book on screenwriting, which are you interested in screenwriting? I mean, do you want to be a screenwriter?
Not particularly. It was,
Okay,
what I'm interested in is storytelling.
Okay.
Storytelling is what fascinates me.
I would much rather focus on storytelling for speaking for
Sure.
this, because I can talk about movies, but in that case, that's a screenwriting issue, and I don't really know how to answer how important is it. Or the other thing, we may not see that a lot, but I'd have to see it again. It's been a while, and then break it down to get into that. So story, I can't do a better job of that, but maybe we have time for one more, and we'll end with a speaking question. How's that? Or did we lose our host? Looks like he disappeared. No, there you are, Scott. Okay, one more I'll try and be succinct if we need to wind this up.
Mark, you want to find one more, or do you want to go to Linda?
Yeah, let's do that. Stop looking. I was looking for
All
something
right,
else.
Linda, you had a question in there as well. Why don't we go to you, and then we'll call it a day on that one.
Okay.
Sure, okay. No, I just think I was getting a little mixed up on your number 6, number 7, the conflict and climax, because I guess I kind of saw those as very similar. And because I thought you also said the climax for the arthritic guy is not just walking his daughter down the aisle. So that's not that's not the climax, but it says achieving the visible goal. So I'm thinking every conflict is kind of a climax when you finish.
No.
When you complete it. But I don't know.
Okay, let me see if I can straighten it out, because those climax and conflict are completely different. Conflict, which will happen repeatedly, is the sum total of all the obstacles and hurdles, both external and internal, the hero has to overcome as they pursue the goal. Because when you tell the story, once the tipping point comes and you define what the goal is, now the hero is going to be pursuing that as they face these obstacles. So conflict means what's stopping, what stands between the hero from her and her goal. Okay. Climax is a single scene that must occur towards the end of the story. It may be the moment where the hero overcomes the last of the obstacles, but it's the moment where they win. It's the moment of crossing the finish line. So you wouldn't really say the finish line in a race is a conflict. They have to break the ribbon, but that's usually easier. The conflict is all the other horses they had to battle, or all the other racers or so on. So the climax is the moment when they achieve the goal. And then the aftermath is a new scene, or it could even be slightly a series, or it could be a little more generalized, but let's just say a new scene after the climax has occurred, sometime later, that shows is a picture of the new everyday life the hero has because they completed that journey, because they overcame those obstacles, or maybe they didn't and they failed at the end, but this is the new life they live either way. So conflict is the sum total of a lot of different events that had to be overcome. Climax is a single scene where they cross the finish line. And aftermath is a picture of the new life they're living.
So in your arthritic example, what would be the climax? Just the guy walking the daughter down the aisle?
Yeah. Well, what was his goal?
Okay, I thought you said that wasn't. So
No, it is.
I misunderstood that.
No, sorry. I may have mumbled or gotten confused myself, but yeah, that's absolutely conflict.
I don't hear.
I mean, now you got me confused, Linda.
Thank
Shame on
you.
That's the climax, is when we see the hero achieve the goal. Okay.
All right.
Scott,
Brilliant.
I think I wore
So-
you guys out.
Oh, no, you're fine. So I have other questions. So what I'm going to do is, if it's okay with you, I will shoot them over to Nevada for you with a chat log and everything. So if you wouldn't mind having a look at them, if there's any of those you want to communicate back to us. I am conscious of time. So if you're okay, I'd like to say thank you for an amazing evening with us. I know that time runs really quickly. Friends, District 11, please unmute and thank Michael. He is an incredible. I could listen to you
Well,
all
thank
day
you.
long,
Hope so.
every day. So thank you. Thank you.
for
Thank
having
you.
me. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Friends-
Zoom team. It was a pleasure to be here. And go tell great stories now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Friends, the week has just started. We have had 2 incredible speakers. Tomorrow night, we get into the world of improv. We have the incomparable. This man makes me laugh every time I answer the phone for him. So I can tell you we're in for a fantastic night. Pat Dwyer will be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening from wherever the heck he is. Don't ever ask him about going to a recorder concert, but that is hysterical. We'll have some improv, and then we'll be looking at the masked speaker. You remember the masked speaker? We've done that before. And that is going to be amazing as well. We have so much more planned for this week. Please, if you haven't got your friends registered, you need to register them, because this is the only place where I can guarantee on the internet you will have a blooming good time. My friends, it's been a wonderful evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us. We'll look forward to doing it all over again tomorrow night. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Well, this